Hello and welcome to the OT Schoolhouse Podcast, your source for the latest school-based occupational therapy tips, interviews, and research. Now, to get the conversation started, here are your hosts, Jayson and Abby. Class is officially in session.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the OT Schoolhouse Podcast. Today we have on two very special guests, actually. We have a mother-daughter combo to talk about the effects of technology on human development, but primarily in teenagers. So this is going to be a great one for any of you OTs working in middle schools and especially high schools. So stay tuned for that. But first, I have just a few things I want to say. And first, this episode, there is an option to earn 1.5 contact hours of professional development or continuing education. And you can take advantage of that and see the show notes at otschoolhouse.com/episode 30. For this episode, Dr. Foster has graciously provided me with the slides as well. For anyone who does purchase the professional development opportunity, you will receive a copy of those slides to reference to in the future. Also, for this episode, I felt like doing a little something different, something special, and so I want to offer to anyone who listens to this podcast within the first week of it releasing a 25% discount on that professional development opportunity. So all you have to do is go to otschoolhouse.com/episode 30 within the first week of this episode releasing and purchase that professional development. It will be 25% off, and that is without any promo code. You just have to do it by May 21st, as this episode is releasing on May 14th, 2019. And last but not least, before we head into our introductions, I just want to let you all in on a little secret. Maybe you haven't been listening to podcasts for very long. Well, podcasts you can actually speed up, and so you can listen to them at 1.5 times the speed. Some people even listen to them at twice the speed. And so in this case, that means you can earn 1.5 hours of professional development in about an hour by just hitting the little button on your podcast player. It's usually down at the bottom. You might see a 1x. And if you click that, it might turn into a 1.25x or something like that. And so I just wanted to let you all in on that little secret in case you want to listen to the episode a little quicker, get through it, and still get the content. So without further ado, let's get into introducing Stephanie and Nicole Foster. Dr. Stephanie Foster is a licensed and registered occupational therapist here in California, and she currently owns her own clinic here in the Central Coast of California, where she primarily works with children of all ages. Dr. Foster has received specialized training in the Sensory Integration and Praxis Test, also known as the SIPT. Many of you learned about that back in episode 25. But she also has specialized training in the Wilbarger brushing protocol, as well as the therapeutic listening program and vision therapy. And not only has Dr. Foster received specialized training, but she's also contributed in some form to the development or data collection for several of the tests that you're probably very familiar with them. Some include the sensory profile, the BOT test of motor proficiency, and the Miller Functional Scales Assessment Tools, also known as the MFUN. In 2011, as part of her PhD at the Santa Barbara Graduate Institute, Dr. Foster completed a large qualitative study entitled The Relationship of Prenatal, Perinatal, and Developmental Risk Factors on Children's Sensory Processing Patterns that looked at several factors that made children more prone to developing a sensory processing disorder. Also joining us today is Dr. Foster's daughter, Nicole Foster. And Nicole is currently a third-year kinesiology student at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And we're very lucky to have her because she has a lot to add to the topic of teenagers and technology. So let's jump into it. Here is Dr. Stephanie Foster and her daughter, Nicole Foster. Hi, Dr. Foster. Hi, Nicole. How are you doing this evening, Dr. Foster?
I'm very happy and excited to be talking with you tonight. So I'd give this a thumbs up evening.
I love it. And how about you, Nicole?
I'm doing well too. This is great. Thank you for this opportunity.
So I was just sharing in the introduction how you two are a mother-daughter combo, but I actually want to give you the chance to talk a little bit about this dynamic that you guys have going on with occupational therapy and the family and the mother and daughter kind of working together a little bit.
So it's a real privilege and an honor to get to work with my daughter. I've been in OT now for over 26 years, and I've always tried to integrate my work as much as possible with my children and with our home life. And, from the actual physical location of my clinic, I run a sensory integration clinic that's very small and private, right out of our home. And I've always integrated my children. They got to be my toy testers for us.
Yeah.
They are well tested whenever a new assessment came out. My children provided me with what we call hopefully normal development, and they let me practice on them at all stages.
Did they let you, or did you just do it anyways?
You got it.
Yeah.
When we're talking about throwing balls and drawing pictures, I didn't have to do much forcing.
Of course.
I'll come out to your room, sure.
And it's not like they had to go very far to get to the clinic. Everyone listening can't see this, but you guys are in your garage/occupational therapy clinic doing this interview right now, and you gave me a little tour of it a second ago, and it's pretty darn nice. I mean, for all purposes, it works out well, right?
It does. It's really a great business model, and really helped me to balance my roles, even as a professional versus as a parent. I found a nice balance in working at home.
Nice. And obviously the commute is unbeatable. And you were also able to be home. I mean, one of the reasons that I have aspirations to own some sort of business where I can work for myself is because of the kids. And it sounds like you were always able to be home when they came home from elementary school or whatever, and you were there. So I'm sure that was a blessing.
It was a huge blessing. It gave me a lot of control. It gave me a lot of flexibility.
Awesome. So
yeah, right and close.
Right and close, exactly. So Nicole, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you at in life right now?
Yeah, so currently I am a third-year kinesiology student at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I do want to be an occupational therapist, so this has been just a wild ride to be part of this project. Definitely growing up as the daughter of an occupational therapist has really given me the exposure to kind of explore what I wanted to do. And like you said, I grew up with this clinic in my garage, my own little play place. I don't remember how old I was, but I definitely was. It took me a while to realize that this wasn't my space. It was a clinic.
That's funny. Were there any set rules about the kids in the clinic?
Put away whatever toys you pulled out. That's pretty much it.
We also had a lot of strict rules about if you ever saw a child here that you saw in public, that they could never identify. So that my children learned early on that privacy is very important.
Go HIPAA.
Yeah, absolutely. That's important. I mean, I never thought about that part when you told me that you worked out of your garage and that the kids are always around. Never even thought, because they were probably going to school with some of the kids that you might have been treating. So definitely, right. Very important.
So that it was always, very privacy is important. They couldn't identify him in the playground. Same rules that we would follow.
Yeah, of course.
Practitioners. I do have to say, though, that the other benefit of working out of your home is we had probably the number one place for kids to sleep over.
All my friends, even into high school, loved coming over because we have crash pads, we have swings, we have basically everything you'd need for a sensory integration treatment room, but we could actually play with it without treated,
Yeah.
And they would fight over the ball pit, who got to sleep.
Of course.
Ball pit.
Let's be fair. Every kid fights over the ball pit at some point in their life.
Who wants to sleep over? We play great movies while kids are watching ball pit, sitting in the ball pit.
Yeah. Cool. So today we're here to talk about some technology use among teenagers. And my first question really is, why did you decide to start looking into technology among teens?
I, like we just discussed, I've always tried to integrate my professional journey and my role as a parent. And as we were growing up as parents, we were part of that age when we remember when there wasn't a phone. Mm-hmm. Slowly the phone became more and more prevalent. And I always thought I felt I was a responsible parent. So as we gave our kids phones, we also gave them boundaries and rules on when to use them, how to use them, what kind of content that they could look at. And we found that we thought we were doing everything right.
Well, that's nice.
But despite our best efforts, we have children that follow those rules, and then we had children also that thought that they didn't have to follow those rules. And surprisingly, through my children's adolescence, they balked against the rules, and it left us in a quandary. What do we do? It's a great opportunity to be able to have a phone, but it caused a lot of problems, rifts, and stress in our families. And so it wasn't until I kind of turned it around and said, okay, I must not be alone in this. I can't be a parent struggling with this. That I kind of turned to my OT roots, did some research, started asking around for help, and then I was able to dig up some really good resources and created the early development of this talk.
Mm-hmm. And then somewhere along the way, I jumped in because I felt like teens needed to be defended. To be completely honest, that was my initial reaction. But it also gave me an opportunity to look at the research myself and to engage with why the rules were the way the rules were. And that helped me to kind of be the advocate for teens, but also be like, here are some better ways, or here are some ways that I think would work to help this transition between no technology to technology flow better between kids and parents.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, I mean, let's just keep going with that then. So what is the definition of technology that we're going to talk about today? And I guess leading off of what you just said, parents and kids look at technology differently. Mm-hmm. Is it the same for both, or is it a little different if you're a teen versus an adult?
I would argue that it needs to be the same, or at least the definitions need to be understood. We are specifically talking about any instrument utilizing a virtual interface as a means of finding, learning, communicating, and relaying information. That includes the internet. A more specific term for this could be specifically communication technology. So we just drop the communication and talk about technology. This is your phones, your computers, your TVs, those kind of devices that would help you communicate with other people to access that information, but specifically like they have a screen, it's not a book.
Absolutely. So right now then, what are some popular trends among teenagers and technology? What are they using?
So teens are probably using smartphones the most. That's gotta be the computer that's in your pocket. We're seeing a lot of wearable technology like Fitbits and Apple Watches, which have increased connectivity between individuals. We've also got a lot of computers as computers are moving into our classrooms, especially as college students are, it's really easy to take notes on a computer. So there's more technology available to consumers, and we see it everywhere. We've also got TVs that have been around, since TVs have been around. And we've got, that's mostly it.
Yeah.
Phones, computers.
iPads, tablets.
I count that as a computer. But
basically, yeah. I mean, they're just as powerful now, so definitely.
Exactly.
All right, and so now we have all these devices. You're right. Not everyone has every device, and most prefer one device over the other.
Right.
But for the most part, you can do the same thing on just about every device. And so what are we seeing teenagers using technology mostly for?
Communication and entertainment would be the biggest things that teens are using technology for.
Yeah, I think Nicole's hit it right on the mark. In fact, we just asked the youngest teenager in the Foster family, and she said, and don't forget entertainment.
And so entertainment being games and
Netflix.
Okay, so any type of media that you just take in. And kind of, I think of it as almost passive intake when I think of entertainment a little bit. But there are also like games which are very not passive and very active. So I guess I can't just say passive. Yeah. And so What does the research say about social media in teens? Is there some research out there?
According to the Pew Research Center, in 2015, most teens were using technology several times a day or less. But in 2015 or in 2018, when they redid the survey, they found that 95% of teens are almost constantly on some sort of device. They're online, they're on their phones, they're on their computers. So that's an incredibly significant jump. As far as their views on social media, those can be pretty ranged. Again, by the Pew Research Center, about 45% think that 45% of US teens say that social media has neither a positive nor negative effect on people their age. So that's our biggest group. But 31% say it's mostly a positive effect, and they cite that being connected with family and friends is really important to them, and that's what most social media is supposed to do. About a quarter of teens believe technology is mostly negative, and the biggest reason for that is cyberbullying and rumor spreading. I interpreted these results as teens in general have a pretty realistic view of technology, and as a group, they are aware of a lot of positive and negative effects of it.
Yeah, and my only take on that is that it sounds like a self-report, correct? As far as we know. And so this is how people feel about their own personal use and or just the use of cell phones or technology in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, and I don't necessarily expect you to have any information on this, but maybe you do, is that I'm sure there are other people now that are looking from the outside in and looking at what the actual effects of someone using technology greater than 8 hours a day or something like that could be. And I'm starting to see more of that coming around where there's people, it's not just a survey, it's more of an actual research that they're taking qualitative data on. And I'm sure that's going to continue to pick up as those numbers that you were just talking about, a dramatic spike in 3 or 4 years of how often teenagers and adults, I'm sure, are using technology every day. So, yeah. How do you feel? Do you agree with the findings of the positive and negative sides of technology?
For the most part, yes. I do think that technology, specifically the internet, has allowed us to stay connected to friends more. I mean, I have friends overseas, and it's been really nice to just text them instead of writing letters. Also, information is a lot easier to access, right? You can Google anything. But that comes with its downsides. You are more exposed to false information, wrong information. You are exposed to negatives like the teens are identifying as bullying and rumor spreading. You also have the pressure to have a personality, like a specific way you present yourself online. And that could be really life destroying if it's not what you need it to be.
So what I'm hearing you say is that some people are trying to pretend to be someone online that they may not be in real life, and that's kind of the new peer pressure, is online peer pressure in a way, that people are expected to take the perfect selfies and post or reshare this person's post versus this person you're not allowed to share their post or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So that phenomenon we're describing is called the e-personality. It's the idea of you have a specific way of presenting yourself online. And yeah, there is high pressure for teenagers to present the best version of themselves when you're online.
Gotcha. And so, I mean, obviously this is a growing phenomenon. Like we were just talking about, the numbers are extreme and changing. What guidelines are out there for anyone for technology use? Is there guidelines for teenagers versus kids or for adults? I don't know who wants to take that one.
Yes, absolutely. Because of the prevalence of technology use, the American Academy of Pediatrics has actually come down very firm and very clear on appropriate media use for children's all the way birth, all the way up.
Oh, okay. And so what does that look like then?
Okay. So here's here is one of the good things that even over the last 10 years, that recommendation hasn't changed. So we checked recently just to see if our doctors are changing their minds, and they're standing firm. So the recommendation is there is never a reason to put an infant in front of media, period.
All right. That's pretty clear cut.
And I love that they are very firm on this, that really there's no reason to put any child or toddler, anybody under 24 months old, in front of a TV. The only time that they say that it might be okay is that if that media allows for connection. And they're talking about having a video conference with your grandmother who lives on the other side of the country. Yeah. So that it's okay to Skype with your grandparents as a way of connection and building relationship, but doctors do not recommend putting a child in front of a TV as a manner of babysitting so that the mother can get dinner cooked or the father can cook dinner. They further pull that out that sometime between 18 months and 24 months that it is okay to watch high quality educationally based movies, but that needs to be done together. So it is okay to put your 2-year-old in front of a Sesame Street movie as long as you're together. Again, never separate.
Okay.
And then as the children grow, the recommendation is for kids 2 to 5 years old, only less than an hour per day. And I like that. Again, I like that a lot because that's another time when parents can be sitting with their children. They call it co-viewing or just cuddling on the couch and watching together. And not only is that a time for really good physical connection, but it's also a time where parents can then say, how does this relate to our world? What is it that we're watching and how does it relate to the real world?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not in those words, because a 5-year-old wouldn't.
Thank you.
But that's the idea. It's building family. It's building connection.
So I remember when hearing you both speak at OTAC, the recommendation for anyone after 5 years of age was less than 2 hours of technology a day. But aside from that, what other guidelines are in place that we should try to adhere to, especially when it comes to our kids, are, older than 5, but still kids?
After that, we just want it to be so that it doesn't get in the way of function and playing outside.
Okay.
Kind of recommendations are to always have a parent monitor what they're doing for media content, to avoid fast-paced programs, to avoid violence in the programs, to turn off the media when it's not in use, so that your movie in the background does not provide the background noise in your house.
Okay.
Actually watch a movie together and then you turn it off.
Okay.
They also recommend keeping your bedrooms, meal times, and parent-child times screen-free. So we don't bring our phones to dinner table. Right? We don't see each other enough anyway, but mealtime is not a time that we can look stuff up. Very, very strong recommendations and good research coming out on the use of screens 1 hour before bedtime. That we do know that looking at your phone an hour before you go to bed can actually interrupt your deeper levels of sleep.
Yeah, and I will absolutely admit that I'm guilty on that one. And and I noticed the effects. I noticed the effects. Last night was not a good one. I stayed up late on top of that, and I was basically on my computer until I basically shut my computer and walked to bed. And so it was hard to fall asleep, and it was late. So now I'm like working on a little sleep right now. But yeah, so I'll raise my hand. I'm guilty on that one. So.
Yeah, so you did notice like racy thoughts and maybe difficulty settling down.
Yeah, and then I jump into my mindfulness practice and start to slow down my breathing and to offset it a little bit. But hopefully, I need to, and I am mindful of it, and I make the conscious decision to disregard it, even though I know that it is best practice and evidence-based, and I should be doing it, but knowing it versus doing it, two very different concepts. So,
Oh yeah.
So I want to go. What was that?
Oh, I was just going to say that in and of itself is one of the problems why parents have issues getting their teens to follow these rules, is knowing it versus just following a rule.
Yeah. So I'm gonna come back to that in just a second, Nicole. But your mother was talking about, actually, she used a very key word that like I picked up on, and babysitting, letting an iPad or a phone do the babysitting. And I just want to get your thoughts on that, because I see it too. And your thoughts can totally be like that. Maybe we shouldn't call it babysitting, or maybe we need to call out parents more, or what, because it's a hard term to use. And so I want your thoughts on that.
What does that mean?
Oh, I was very empathetically shaking my head no. Don't ever do it. One of the things I'm learning from all of this research is technology should never be a substitute. It is a tool, and using YouTube or using Netflix shouldn't be a substitute for other forms of entertainment, especially because screens have such an impact on neural development in kids. So yeah, don't put your kid in front of a screen just so they will be quiet. I don't think that that's in the long term helping children develop skills that they need later in life.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. I think that's right on. So my thing, and maybe we're not quite there yet, but I think this is going to be eventually an area of practice that there will be, I don't know if it's going to be OTs, hopefully it will be, but people that are helping parents to help their kids with technology. And where do you see that going in the future?
Well, even just in our own case, just getting the word out there that that schools and that society is so pro use of technology across the board, whether you are in an academic setting or you're in a store. There's just pushing. You can use your phone anywhere you're at. And the response that we're getting from this message that we need to promote some balance has been really wonderful. Where I offered to give this talk 2 years ago to a school system, and the superintendent told me she really wanted the teachers to buy into it, and she didn't want to present the other side. And we presented this idea in the last couple weeks to present it to the same school district, and the superintendent is ready to bring us in for a parent education night.
That's important what you just said, actually, because I did a similar thing. I actually gave a presentation about the importance of play to a group of parents at a school about a month ago. And one of the things I said was, we need to limit technology. We shouldn't rely on technology, all that, to parents. And I was actually doing this at my wife's school. She's a fourth grade teacher. And then afterwards, she comes up to me and she's like, "It was great, but our school is so heavily focused on technology use." And so you're absolutely right. I mean, there's high schools now that they provide students with a computer, and every student on campus has a computer. And it's just like, the evidence is saying we need to limit technology, and here we are forcing it down their throat, basically 7 hours a day.
Right.
And so this is going to be a topic of discussion for many years to come, I believe. So going forward, if I remember right, you have some information as far as brain development and how potentially what we need to look at as far as technology and neuroplasticity. This is an awesome topic and takes a little bit. Go ahead and let us know what you're thinking as far as the neuroplasticity and technology.
Sure. Let's start with just a very brief review of brain development. I have so much respect for the way our body is wired, and that we naturally and beautifully develop. And you probably know that prenatally, your brain is the first structure to form. And then by the time that neonate reaches 6 months gestation, they've already developed a lifetime supply of neurons. So even before the baby's born, they have what they need structurally. At birth, a baby is born with 100 billion brain cells. Now, these are immature brain cells, but the baby has everything that they need to live and to grow throughout their life. At 8 months old, this number increases to 500 trillion connections. I can't even visualize 500 trillion connections. And then by 2 years, it's up to 1,000 trillion connections. By 3 years old, the baby or the child's nervous system has the greatest density of synapses it will ever have. And the brain structure and design is nearly complete. So then the child continues to develop, and by 10 years old, most of the synapses that they will ever have are completely formed. And at that point, we see something called pruning, or the pruning process. Pruning is a process of removing neurons, which may have been damaged or degraded in order to improve function or their networking capacity. And this pruning leaves only the strong ones, which can become permanent. And again, in normal development, by 18 years old, this pruning process has decreased the number of connections by half. So that's just a very quick overview of brain development. And then we want to talk a little bit about neuroplasticity. And we define neuroplasticity as the brain's ability to reorganize itself through the forming of new neural connections. And neuroplasticity is so important. It's what allows us to recover from injury, from environmental exposure, from anything that's going to cause a problem in your nervous system. And it occurs over a lifetime. Neuroplasticity is what allows you to recover from a stroke, from a head injury, depending on the level of difficulty or severity. Yeah. So how does neuroplasticity work? I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful concept. There's a large amount of research right now that focuses on this question. Scientists are certain that the brain continually adjusts and reorganizes itself. In fact, while they were studying monkeys, they found that the neuronal connections in many brain regions appear to be organized differently each time they were examined. So it's kind of neat that we can do the research. We have the brain conduction studies out there that actually can track, these pathways are working right now, but following this particular type of injury, we can now actually visualize how neuroplasticity is working and how the brain itself is reorganizing so that life can continue.
Gotcha. And then, so what are some of your hypotheses that exist around technology and brain development? I mean, whether they're your hypothesis or if there's any, what are you reading about or hearing about?
Well, we're hearing in a very scary way that technology has changed how our brains develop. So there is a whole debate in the science world about nature versus nurture. And when we talk about nature, that's what you get through your genes. So it's your basic wiring. And then there's that nurturing. And I believe that's what you're getting at. What is the nurture? And for us, that nurture comes from your environment. And what is the environment doing to fine tune our brains? And we are finding a huge impact and huge change in MRI studies or brain scans between people that have an overabundance use of technology.
Yeah. So I know I've seen some studies as far as people using either virtual reality or some sort of technology with patients that may have a stroke to kind of work on that neuroplasticity. What other types of interventions have you seen that maybe focus more on that technological side as far as aiming toward neuroplasticity?
So there's some really wonderful research out there that point to the positive implications of using technology. One of them was came out in 2014 that looked at traumatic brain injury treatment. This one was an online program that taught problem solving for executive dysfunction in children following traumatic brain injury. And what they found that this particular online problem-solving game improved long-term memory, improved executive function, and it helped children with focusing on problem-solving, communication, and self-regulation. And this particular study looked at adolescents over 14 years old.
Okay.
Another study that came out in 2013 that looked at neuroplasticity in children with ADHD. And this was an online cognitive training program as an alternative to medication, which as an OT, I really like that we are still talking about alternatives to medicating. And it found to be very, very helpful for kids with ADHD.
Are you, from reading that study, were you able to kind of get in tune with what it kind of looked like, what that model or what they were really doing? Or not quite? I know sometimes it can be tricky when you're reading an article to really get the gist of what they're actually doing. It says that they're using this cognitive development type of strategy, but it's hard to see. So
yeah, no, the article is very, very specific on which one that they were using. I'm not finding exactly it here in my notes which one for this study.
Okay.
But I know even in my own practice that I am using a internet-based technology to help with attention span. So an example of that would be using the interactive metronome, which is which is something I never thought I would be advocating for. But the interactive technology, interactive metronome sets up a metronome beat, and children have to meet that beat with their hands and clapping or with hitting one side of their leg. And then when they get good at that, then they use both upper body and lower body, and they're playing a video game. So the kids are really, really motivated to get the video game to give them scores. And they try, and what I have found here in my clinic is that they try really hard, and they're given really, really specific feedback on how quick or what their automatic responses are.
So I want to touch on that then. So you're saying it measures their clapping or it measures how they hit their knee. How does it measure that? Do you have to put some sort of sensor? Like, are they wearing a glove or special pants that have a sensor in it? Or what does that look like?
Because it's computer-based, they wear earphones and they hear a sound. And interactive technology, it's a cowbell sound. And they have to clap or make a response as close to that cowbell sound as they can. So they are improving bilateral skills, they're improving their reflex response. And the computer then times the difference between the cowbell and their response down to milliseconds.
Oh, okay. So does it use like a microphone to pick up when they clap, or is that? Yeah. Oh, okay.
There is a microphone that attaches to it as well. They wear a little trigger on their hand, so when they clap, it triggers.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
That's cool.
And if you like in one of them, there's a monkey and he gets to eat a banana after you get so close.
Oh.
Milliseconds, the monkey gets the banana, and then that's the reward for getting more and more coordinated.
So it really is a video game then. Like, it's straight up, it's got an objective to it, and you just got to make the right moves to get the banana. Cool.
Correct. Highly motivating, really colorful. And then as an OT, again, I like that I can track something right hand and left foot, and I can move it that forward. I can be that specific. Because I would never be able to tell what's the difference between 5 milliseconds and 30 milliseconds. But the computer allows me to be that specific.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm kind of ready to move on to the next area because I think this is going to be like the super fun, super interactive area. And that is looking into the good, the bad, and the ugly of technology. And so I don't know. I think we should start off with the good aspects of technology. I know we just talked a little bit about how some of that technology you're using through like the interactive metronome through therapy. But what else is the good side of technology?
So I do find even in my small private practice that I use technology a lot. So I do have a website. I do reach out to parents on social media. I don't have to put an ad in the newspaper anymore. When people are searching for help for their children, they go right to technology. So that gives us more information quicker. It helps us deal with the problems that we have throughout our day faster. I also use it to help children who are nonverbal. So we have something called the Pro-Lo-Quo-To-Go. It's a fun word. And that's software that helps us build communication boards.
Yeah, and that's an iPad app, right? Or phone app or some sort of app?
It's some kind of app, right?
Yeah.
That you could use on your computer so you print, or you could use it on something smaller that you bring with you that the child can press and touch in order to produce a sound.
Okay. And then I want to bring this up because you guys actually touched upon this when I got to see you for the first time, and that was the marshmallow test. And this is one of those things that I think every OT, you may not remember it, but you probably heard a little bit about it in school. And it's about delayed gratification, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And so I'm going to let you kind of explain the original and now the new study.
Sure. And, the reason why I included this, because initially the results horrified me. As a parent and as a reader of the research, it horrified me. So I'm going to present it to you, and I'm going to challenge you and our listeners to make their own conclusions.
Yeah.
So in 1960, Stanford University came up with the marshmallow test. And they said that this was the gold standard for testing delayed gratification. The test looked at preschoolers, children ages 3 to 5 years old in the 1960s, in which a child was brought into a room, sat at a table, and on the table there was nothing in the room except a marshmallow. And the child was told that the examiner had to leave the room, but if the marshmallow was there when the examiner came back, that the child would then get 2 marshmallows. At that time, only 1/3 of the kids were actually able to put it off, to delay gratification. So in other words, 2/3 of the kids couldn't enough, and they just grabbed the marshmallow and ate it.
That would have been me.
That would have been you.
No, but...
At least you know.
Yep.
At least you know. So recently, they have continued this test, and recently, 2018, the American Psychological Association put together the latest findings, where they checked again on children's abilities to delay gratification. They used the 1960s, they used the 1980s, and then they used the 2000s, and they compared them across for the time that it took, the time that children were allowed, or I'm sorry, not allowed, but the time that children tolerated looking at that marshmallow without grabbing it. And what they found was that the actual time that children were able to wait increased, which is pretty interesting, right? The amount of delayed gratification has actually improved for this particular example.
And of course, we're talking 50 years difference between when it originally happened and now, and technology has only been super prevalent for the last 15, 20 years, you could argue. And
right.
So there's more than just technology to that. But, what do you take away from it?
See, the authors were saying that this increase in delayed gratification is due to increase in symbolic thought, the increase in use of technology, the presence of preschool, and where more kids at that age range are actually attending preschool, and also a greater emphasis in parenting on executive functioning skills. So planning and preparing for whatever's coming next, being able to take your backpack and put in what you need for school and bring it with you. What do I take from it? See, that's the challenge for me. Do I agree that kids these days have a greater ability to delay gratification? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I agree with these researchers, but I think that it's food for thought. I think it's something that parents really need to talk about. Do we see that kids are able to wait? The authors said that it explains why kids these days have more access to games, and the games that they play require more ability to wait. So you don't just get to the end. You actually have to use your coordination to go through each level of the game in order to get that golden prize.
That's interesting. So they actually did talk about a little bit of technology within that article then, and gaming and stuff like that.
Correct.
Wow. Okay. Because I mean, when you said that, I was a little taken aback because I kind of thought it would be the opposite. Because I mean, now in video games, you die and you come back to life in 2 seconds. I mean, there's very little time that you get to actually that you're not quote unquote not playing. Your downtime, and so that's actually a surprise. But on the flip side of that, from my video game experience, yes, you're right that there is that. I was never good at finishing games because I didn't like playing like 8, 10, 12 levels to get to the end. I was more of that. I wanted to play the games where you were dead for 5 seconds and came back to life. And so, but there's different types of games and yeah, so, all right. Well, it's interesting how that works.
The good news is that if this is true, if our children today have greater perseverance and greater ability for delayed gratification than the children back in the 60s, then it really behooves the parents to take an active role in their technology use. That parents really need to challenge their kids and have these discussions to say, and what am I doing to teach my children perseverance? How do I help my children delay that gratification? How do I help my children plan so that whatever that goal is or the task is, can be more effective? And maybe that's one way to do it, is to use video and video games together as a tool to build that idea of planning and executive function.
Yeah. And I just keep going back to that conversation we had earlier about using technology as a babysitter. And I see that, you're out at the store and a kid starts crying and the first thing that we do is hand the kid the iPhone, the iPad. And what's that doing for delayed gratification? I mean, maybe not a whole lot. So, yeah.
Right. You're absolutely right. It's teaching the child that if I cry, I'm going to get the phone.
Yeah.
In a public place. But it doesn't have to be that.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. Parents can make that decision on how they want to train that moment.
Yeah. All right. So done with the bad and on to, done with the good. My bad. And they kind of, I could see how things, from one perspective, they're good. From another perspective, maybe not so good. It all kind of depends on your own personality and beliefs on technology too. I mean, everyone has their own beliefs, but jumping into some of the bad aspects of technology that some of maybe the research or whatever is showing, what do we need to look out for?
So one of the books that I found really, really easy talked about the rap on digital media. And the rap on digital media is coming out of MIT. This is talking about the rap is how digital media affects your relationships, affects your attention span or any potential addiction to using it, and also privacy. And what they are talking about here is that this constant connectivity really does disrupt our attachments to other people, so much that you could be in a room with many other people and you can still feel alone.
Yeah. I mean, I get that because technology kind of draws you in and you get very caught up on that one thing. And, I know you guys aren't school-based practitioners, but I'm sure you're probably familiar with IEPs, and it's funny, every now and then you'll be sitting in an IEP and every single person's on their phone. And I'm sure there's many other places where that happens. And, it's kind of make of it as you will, but it's an easy way to get out of a conversation. It's an easy way to embrace yourself in something that is not in the moment. And so, now, I mean, we're adults and that happens. So what about teenagers? I mean, what does this look like for our teenagers then?
Right. I'm sure we've seen lots of groups of teenagers. They go out, they're together, and, 3/4 of the room are on a phone. And so how is that an interaction? I think text messaging and the way that we communicate now is also in some respects, it's increasing our connection, but it's also decreasing the quality of that connection. Because what do you text to your friends? Meet you in 5 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. This class is hard. Whatever that short snippet of a conversation is, it really is making it Minimal.
Yeah, lots of emojis.
Yeah, there you go. Now we can even express how we're feeling by sending a smiley face.
Yeah, and so I think the next progression to talk about is for parenting. Like, what guidelines? I mean, we talked about guidelines earlier, and there weren't really any guidelines past 5 years old. And so, as parents, what's your take on parents and disciplining using cell phones? I mean, can that be done nowadays?
I'm going to say yes. It depends on the rules of the family, and it depends on the conversations that happen. So, for example, in our house, we had really good rules about our technology use. And then we had an incident, and we had several incidences where those rules didn't apply. And as parents, we were going to be strong, and we took away their phones. And the reaction from our kids surprised us immensely, that the children then withdrew. They started doing sneaky behavior. And at one point, I was told, "You can't do that, Mom. You're taking away my ability to breathe."
Wow.
It was rough. And of course, as a parent, I said, "You're just going to have to learn how to breathe without your phone."
How'd that go?
Yeah, right.
It didn't go down so well.
It didn't go down so well. I mean, it makes sense to me, the parent, but in the teen's mind, it didn't. And then I came across some more information coming out of the Child Mind Institute, where they were replicating my own personal experience, where they were talking about the teen's emotional life. They started where teens don't trust their parents anymore. They call it an invasion of privacy. And children just became more and more withdrawn or depressed because the parents were using the phone as a behavioral either motivator or a reward.
Deterrent.
Behavioral
reward or behavioral deterrent.
Thank you. So that really surprised me. And what comes out of that, what's the lesson learned on that is, as a parent, it's my job then to improve that communication, do everything I can to open and continue to talk with my child, to build trust, and to really understand the whys. Why is it important for me to have your phone after 9 o'clock at night? Why is it important that at any time I can take your phone and I can search wherever you've been going? Kids need to know that the parents still hold those boundaries and still hold them because they want to keep their kids safe.
Absolutely. And I see it in IEPs still, or now, because often I work at a high school, and I mean, there are very few IEPs where we're not talking about the student using their phone way more than they need to be using their phone on campus during class, or B, how can we use their phone to help them succeed in class? And it seems to be one or the other. It's either it's too much of a problem, or we need to use their phone to help them, such as, using the calendar app, using voice to text, using, just telling Siri to remind them to turn in their homework, something like that. But it's becoming, super prevalent. Kids all have phones now, I think, right? I mean, can we agree that every kid, at least in high school, has a phone? I think. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's just something that we're talking a lot about. Nicole, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's why balance is so important, because technology, your phones, your computers, those are tools. They're not anything but a tool. And getting that message across to teenagers takes many different forms, because you've got different types of people, you've got just different experiences, and that's our challenge as professionals, as parents, as teachers, to develop that balance between overuse and just the right amount.
Gotcha. And we're going to get into, we got one more section, and then we're really going to get into that whole teenagers using phones and what we can do about it. But I want to give you a second to go over the ugly of technology first. And I know we've got some stuff about that to go over. So, yeah, so what is like the worst now? I mean, we've talked about some pretty bad things. We've talked about some good things too. But where are we going?
Well, I'd love to just jump into one of my research. I'm sorry, it's not mine. One of the research reports that I found that looked at prenatal exposure effects and how it affects postnatal development and behavior. And this particular study was done on rats, and mostly it's done on rats because it's not ethical for us to do this kind of research on living beings. But this study investigated how maternal restraint stress, which was called being caged up with minimal exercise, and Wi-Fi signal exposure impacted postnatal development of behavior. I found it very interesting. They looked at 4 groups of pregnant rats. Their control groups were pregnant rats who just were left alone, undisturbed in their home cage. There was no Wi-Fi, there was no stimulation, they were just left alone in their home cage. There was a Wi-Fi exposed group, and the Wi-Fi exposed groups actually were for 2 hours a day. These freely moving animals in their home cage were exposed to whole body radiation coming from a Wi-Fi device via a wireless router or antenna. And that antenna was placed 25 centimeters from the cage. Then there was a restraint group, and they took these pregnant rats and restrained them in a between front and back. So they put in plexiglass boundaries, and they made these rats just basically lay still for 2 hours a day. Now, the researchers did check so that the rats were not under huge distress, but they were limited. They couldn't do anything for 2 hours a day. They just laid there, which I thought was pretty interesting because 2 hours a day might be you sitting
Netflix,
not moving, right? So that was really interesting.
Recording a podcast.
Yes, we're not moving much, right? We're sitting here. So they measured everything. They measured the length of gestation of their babies. They measured the number of live and dead pups. They measured the sex. They measured eye movement. They looked at neuromuscular tests. And they looked at anxiety-like behaviors at 28 days old, and they also looked at it later on in the pups' lives. Across the board, the end result is, and we're going to make this really simple because this report had lots of data on it, but across the board, the prenatal Wi-Fi radiation and the restraints group had more behavioral and biochemical impairments in both the juvenile and the adult age offspring.
Wow. So all that signals that are flying above our head at every given moment of the day. I mean, obviously this was with rats, but we have no idea what the long-term effects are for everything that we're experiencing throughout our days.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why this was like, wow, we can actually measure it now. We can actually measure it. So a couple other interesting ones. There's a lot of work being done on internet addiction disorder. The World Health Organization is actually including internet gaming disorder now in the ICD-9. That's the good news. The bad news is that they won't actually use it. That particular classification system is not out until 2022, but at least it's there. Mm-hmm. And at least it's on the way. And they're finding prevalence. They're really doing some nice work on prevalence. So what is the presence of internet addiction that they're seeing now? Nicole, I actually believe you found this one that we were looking at in 12 to 25-year-olds, that they were somewhere between 5.7. In males, it was higher, 8.4 versus females was about 2.9% of a population.
A lot of that variability is due to the lack of a specific diagnosis between countries. And so I would recommend that we figure out a diagnosis for this disorder so we can have a better handle on how common it is and how to treat it.
Yeah. But we're finding pretty much it's between that 10 to 20% of the population is coming up with an internet addiction disorder.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that could potentially mean that they have decreased cortical thickness, is what that research is saying.
Correct. There was some additional research that talked about cortical thickness where they looked at 15 male adolescents with internet addiction and compared them with a control group of for matched subjects. They did MRIs on them using a 3T MRI, and the results confirmed that actually male adolescents with internet addiction had significantly decreased cortical thickness in the right lateral orbitofrontal. That's a big one. The OSC was significant. Was significant in all the statistics, and so they are concluding that yes, people that have internet addiction have actually changed their on a permanent basis. They've changed the cortical thickness, and they've changed those structures in our brain that are so important.
Wow. Well, you definitely lived up to the ugly side of technology. That does not sound good. And so, I mean, I guess the next thing to really do is talk about what do we do about it, and what is based upon, again, you guys have done some research, you guys have done some literature reviews. What are people doing, or what can we do?
So the message is, and in one of my favorite books there's this really great book called Talking Back to Facebook. And it was a professor out of Stanford. His name is James Stayer. It's a very readable research. It's a very readable book for anybody, not just people that like research. And his bottom line is that as parents, what we really want to do is protect our kids. We want to protect them, and we want to help control their environment. But the reality of our modern age is that digital technology is everywhere. That it's impossible to get away from it, and we can't change it, and we can't go back. That it's something that we have to do. So as parents and as educators, it's up to us to help kids use their screen time for a productive manner in a way that's balanced.
And so then, how do you propose that parents or therapists, I mean, because I've never actually done this, but I have told people in an IEP that I could probably come up with a goal for a student in a school-related IEP about social media and or telephone use. Because it is absolutely true that you can't separate the two. Like you were saying, there's no going back. And I know from personal experience now that kids use social media to complete schoolwork. They share notes on Twitter. They share notes on Snapchat. They send each other videos of like YouTube videos to study from. Like it's completely intertwined. And so obviously we can't, like you said, we can't take this away. The students need this to succeed. But what can we do to, kind of keep it from being too much of an overload?
So a media diet is a way to promote that balanced use of screens and social media. You've got to help teens develop the skills they need to use media, social media, internet appropriately so that they can use it as that tool and minimize the health effects that can come from that. One model of behavior change that I was introduced to through my classes was the trans-theoretical model of behavior change. And this model was designed for behavior change relating to addiction, but you can take these general concepts and apply it to anybody who wants to change their behavior.
All right, well then how do you apply that to teenagers who may be using their phone too much?
There are 5 basic stages that behavior will cycle through at any time. You've got pre-contemplation, which is the individual does not recognize that they have a need to change their behavior. Contemplation is the stage where that individual would start to think about their behavior and consider whether or not they need to change or not. Preparation is the planning for that behavior change. Action stage is where you're developing and adopting those new behaviors and working them into habits. And then once they become habits, you move into that maintenance stage where you're trying to maintain that ongoing new healthy behavior. To move from each of these stages are a few concepts called the stages of change, or the processes of change. And there are roles for teens, parents, counselors, health professionals, you name it, in most of these stages. For example, to move an individual from pre-contemplation to contemplation, you have to make the teenager aware that they're spending too much time on their phone. Environmental reevaluation is assessing how your environment is affecting you and other aspects of your situation. So for a teenager, it would be assessing how a screen time affects their physical and social environment. Dramatic relief is the ability to express emotions about your behavior. So this would be helping a teenager express both their positive and their negative emotions about their phone usage, getting them to be real, like, is this affecting you negatively, and how does that make you feel? This is a stage where parents and counselors and occupational therapists can be helpful to get those teens to kind of evaluate their situation and evaluate where they're at. To move from that contemplation stage to actually preparing to make a change, teens have to evaluate themselves and understand what it would be like without this excessive screen time. And then the teen has to make the decision to change their behavior in order to move into that action phase. So the contemplation to preparation stage is where parents and professionals can help the teen weigh those pros and cons for the excessive screen usage and help prepare, make a plan, come up with realistic ways to change your behavior. And then the teen has to make that step to change their behavior. And I would emphasize that this concept, it's called self-liberation, would be completely the teen's choice, because if it's not, then it's really hard to get the behavior change to stick. The teen has to make the decision to spend less time so that they're really behind this behavior change. And then to move from the action to maintenance phase, basically to move from decreasing screen time into a permanent behavior, you have a couple of concepts that can help maintain a healthy media diet. One is counter conditioning, and that is substituting unnecessary screen time for something else. So instead of watching YouTube or Netflix, you read a book, or you exercise, or you do something that doesn't require you sitting in front of a screen.
Yeah.
Helping relationships are incredibly important for developing the support you need, the social support in particular, so that the teen will continue that good behavior. They're supported by their friends, their families, or their professionals that are around them. Stimulus control is controlling situations that would trigger excessive phone use. So if you know if the teen knows that they've got 20 minutes between, being picked up from school and when school actually ends, and if that's a case where they're on their phone too much, then you've got to come up with situations to stop that trigger. So maybe taking the effort to talk to your teacher for an extra 5 minutes, or focusing on getting a little bit of reading done for your homework. Basically, controlling the situations that would trigger excessive screen time. Reinforcement management is also effective to making sure that rewards for not being on your phone are appropriate. So if you are trying to decrease excess screen time, a reward could be face-to-face social interaction. So instead of being on your phone while you're waiting in line, you actually talk to the person next to you and you gain that relationship, that friendship as a reward. That one's kind of tricky, and that's where parents and professionals can really help the teen hone in on what extrinsic and intrinsic rewards are effective in continuing decreasing their screen time.
Yeah. And how do you go about monitoring screen time? Like, I mean, how is there a way to monitor your screen time versus today versus yesterday or tomorrow? I mean, how do you actively measure this?
So there are a few apps specifically for smartphones that could help with that. I know my Apple phone has a built-in, I don't know if it's an app or whatnot, but it actually, my phone measures the amount of screen time that I use my phone, and it categorizes it based on what I'm doing. So at this very moment, today I've been on my phone for 2 hours and 35 minutes, and 40 minutes of that has been social networking. So there are other apps you can download, and that will help you monitor your phone time. So I would guess one way to monitor screen time is to have something that measures it. Other ways are to have you write it down, to be more of an active participant in what you're doing, and to write it down. I'm on my phone. I've been on my phone for 5 minutes. I need to write this down. Or I am planning to work on my computer, so I'm going to write down the time I'm starting, and then I'll write down the time I stop.
Yeah. And I mean, you started to talk about media diets a little while ago. I mean, what does this kind of sounds to me like we're headed toward creating a media diet with what you're saying right now. And so what does that ultimately look like?
So a media diet would look at that balance between work, rest, play, and time on a screen, and really, really quantifying for people how much time you are talking or being around your family, how much time you've pulled out your phone and you're withdrawing, and promoting balance, so that if you know that, if in your house it's okay to be on your phone for 2 hours, then you make sure that you have an equal amount of time outside in the sun playing games, and an equal amount of time being nurtured or interacting with your family or your parents. So it's about balance. It's about kind of regulating what that intake of media is, balanced with that time that you can just grow, live, and play.
A realistic example for teenagers is, let's say they know they've got 2 hours of homework that they've got to do because they got an essay that they need to type. So they plan for those 2 hours, and then they turn around and make sure they get 2 hours of physical activity. It's really balancing. You have to be on a screen, and then there's the time that you just want to be on the screen with other activities that are engaging with other people or taking care of your health.
Yeah. And so I want to ask you 2 more questions before we kind of potentially wrap this up. One is, we've talked about it a little bit already, but why is this important for occupational therapists? Why do OTs need to be aware of technology among teenagers, and what can they do in the future about it? What do you really see? Where do you see their role in this? This is for both of you. I want to know your opinions.
I think as an OT, don't just look at me. No, I think for OTs, we have a prime role to play in self-regulation, in that ability to be up, to be down, to be okay with your energy levels, and really teaching children how to regulate their behavior throughout their days, and seeing the impact of technology on that self-regulation, teaching these kids that have trouble sleeping anyway, using technology and not using technology as a tool for teaching kids regulation. I think that's very critical for us to really step up to that. I know a lot of kids in my caseload don't sleep through the night, and that's very hard for parents. And I think teaching, being a professional enough to look at a parent and say, maybe it's time to put that phone away, and how can you take it away an hour before bed? Or maybe this child actually needs 2 hours before bed so that they can sleep through the night, then they can be happier, healthier throughout the day.
I lied. I have an additional question. Can parents really get their kids to use less technology when we as adults are using it so frequently?
Thank you.
Actually, a concept I'm fairly passionate about. Modeling behavior is incredibly important because you can't expect kids to do as you say, not as you do. You parents and teachers and anybody who wants to encourage a teenager to use less screens has to also show that they are decreasing their screen usage. Kids know, kids watch, kids understand that if the adults can do it, then it must be okay. And you've got to be aware of how much power parents have in influencing their kids' behavior. So you've really got a role model, and you've really got to explain why you're doing what you're doing so that they will have more buy-in and more intrinsic rewards to not use their screens as much.
Yeah, I think that's something that we all need to work on, whether or not you're a parent or, I mean, just that modeling, especially working on a school. If you work at a school and, you're walking around with your head down on your phone, I mean, that's something that all those other kids, they're seeing. They're seeing that.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Yeah, I think there's three. I mean, if you want it, there's three major kind of your take-home points. Would that be?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so our three major take-home points is set your rules early and follow them. And this is whether you're the parent or the teacher. Set your rules early, and that means early in your child's development, and keep them. You always want to keep your computer in common areas. You want your phone use to be defined. And set that when they're young so that it's not a sudden rule when they're 15 and don't want to follow your rules anyway. My number 2 is set your children up for success.
And this rule is looking at helping kids to understand why they have to follow the rule. This includes avoiding villainizing technology, but also not putting it up on that pedestal. You have to be realistic about what using technology means and how to best use it. This also means including teens in your discussions about technology usage, because that'll get them to engage in their own behavior in a more analytical way. So they're not just following whatever mom and dad say. They're actually being like, no, this is a good idea because blah, 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 blah. And that's why setting up your children for success really includes bringing them in the conversation.
Absolutely.
And last, our third point is be a good role model.
Which we just talked about, so we got that one down. All right, I have one more question. This is not in technical relationship to your presentation or to our interview, but I recently came across on social media, of course, on Facebook, that there may be a proposed bill to California about completely eliminating the use of technology. Well, I think it's mostly cell phones on campuses in California, on public school campuses. What's your guys' thoughts on that?
So I was curious about this, and I looked it up. And according to the press release for Assembly Bill 272, this requires school districts to develop a policy that either prohibits or restricts the use of smartphones on school grounds during school hours. Basically, this bill is making schools evaluate their media policy and to come up with a plan, to outright prohibit it or to put limits on what could be used. Maybe emergencies are okay, or for educational purposes, you can use your computer. But this bill puts the power in the local school districts to develop programs and develop policies for their students.
Yeah, and that's a big one, I think, because, I mean, like, again, I work at the high school. I see kids with their ear pods in all day long. I see kids on their phone. They go to the bathroom and they're making phone calls during, class. It's something that's being used a lot. But on the other side of it, our teachers are required, if they're allowing their students to use their phone for research purposes, they have to put a piece of paper up on their door, outside the door, saying kids are using their phones for research purposes at this time. And they have to do that at the high school. That way, in case the principal walks in, she knows before she walks in that, okay, it's okay for them to have their phones out. They're researching a project. Or, maybe a parent's on campus that day walking in. The last thing you want is a parent going to the principal saying, man, I walked into a class and everyone was on their phone without knowing it was for research purposes. So it kind of sounds like maybe this high school is already kind of on that track that's going on. But yeah, it sounds like maybe something that I'm sure other schools may not be as caught up to date with, and maybe they do need that. So, what
I like is that it's making it a law that the school districts have to create this policy, but the state is not dictating what that policy is. So,
okay.
That they're allowing the local school board, who should know best what their students need. And it allows for exceptions for emergencies and educational purposes. But I really like that, okay, now in California, we are going to say, you need to have a policy. So you need to have a thoughtful discussion on the use of technology and how much are you allowed to use your phone.
Yeah. Gotcha. And if there's anyone out there that doesn't live in California and they already have something like this in place, I'm sure I would love to know. I'm sure you would love to know. And with that, I guess, where can they let you know? What can you share your contact information with us? Maybe your website at least, if not more.
Yeah, absolutely. We are very sincere that we would love to hear from people. We'd love to hear your comments, suggestions to make, and how this particular topic has affected you in your life. So I would be happy to hear from you. My website is KidsWork. It's www.kidswork.biz, B-I-Z. I am Dr. Stephanie Foster, and I am also welcoming people to reach out and email me. There is a link through my website, or you can reach me at Stephanie, STEPHANIE, at kidswork.biz.
Great.
That's probably the best way to get a hold of me as well, is through the website.
Great.
There you go. You're not working actually on the business right now, are you, Nicole?
So growing up, I was helping with summer play groups, and I've even started developing programs for some of those play groups. And at this point, I am doing more of an office management role because I'm in school myself.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, I really cannot wait to see where you guys go with this in the future. I know you kind of have plans to do more talks like you were talking about at schools. Nicole is just about to start her master's program, so she's going to be doing stuff related to this, potentially a master's thesis or something, depending on the school she goes to. I just can't wait to hear what you guys do at future AOTA or OTAC or different conferences and stuff. I'm sure this will be something to keep a watch of. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and we'll be sure to keep in touch and maybe have you on again later to see what's going on.
All right.
Thank you.
It's been an honor.
Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. Well, take care. Have a good night, and we'll see you next time.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Well, that was Dr. Foster and her daughter, Nicole Foster, and we really appreciate them coming on to share all that they have. From all the insight into neuronal development by Dr. Foster, as well as all the information about the trans-theoretical model of behavioral change presented by Nicole, everything was fantastic. I can't wait to get back into the high schools and really look into technology a bit more. So I'm excited. You just listened to this podcast. It is about an hour and 25 minutes long. And because of that, you can earn professional development now that you've listened to it. So head on over to otschoolhouse.com/episode 30. There you will have the opportunity to purchase the professional development. It's not too expensive, and all you have to do is take a short quiz that shows that you listened to this episode, and I will then send you a certificate of completion. So I'm looking forward to seeing you over on the website, and until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the OT Schoolhouse podcast. For more ways to help you and your students succeed right now, head on over to otschoolhouse.com. Until next time, class is dismissed.